Too much fun to be had today. I love it. All right, guys, welcome. We'll give everybody a few minutes here to join. I see quite a few people already telling where you're calling from or joining from. I see Virginia, Georgia, Atlanta, Toronto, Texas. They don't have snow, Josh. I bet they don't have snow in Texas.
Hopefully not.
And they might be a little handicapped if they did. I love it. Keep telling us where you're calling from. St. Louis. Welcome all, guys. I'm so excited about this. We'll give you about 30 more seconds and we're going to kick off this action-packed fun session. I can't wait for you to see all the goodies that Tim and I have seen thus far with Quil and our partnership with them. So keep telling us where you're calling from. And we do not have snow in Texas. I am so happy for you guys. Ohio has snow. And it was actually thunder snowing last night here in Ohio.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was lightning and snowing. It was all kinds of fun here. So,
isn't that like a once every 50-year thing? We had that Ontario way a couple of years ago. I think it was last year actually, and they said it was like it happens once every 50 years, if I remember correctly. That's not common.
That's not common, no. And my husband fishes for a living, so he's on a boat on the water until it freezes. And needless to say, his clients canceled today. So I love it. Well, all right, guys, we're going to get started. Definitely would be handicapped with an inch of snow.
Yeah, me too.
That. I get it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on really how AI enhanced recruiting is going to boost your game with the wonderful duo of Crelate and Quil. I'm super excited. I'm thrilled. I've got to see the behind the scenes. I've got to see the product, and I'm thrilled to have two wonderful people joining me today. Josh Kirkham, he's founding head of sales at Quil, and our very own Tim Keckler here, solution architect at Crelate. I'm going to throw it over to Josh first, and he's going to give us an overview, the insights, show you everything about Quil, how it works, and allow you to ask any questions. And then from there, we're going to toss it over to Tim, and together they're going to demonstrate how AI can transform your recruiting workflow, potentially saving you 2 to 3 hours of administrative work. And you're going to be able to ask all the questions. And then with Tim, he's going to walk us through finding those candidates that we work so hard to enter into our system and we pay so much time and effort to find them. So you are going to get a chance to dive in, see all the details. It's going to be interactive though. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout this presentation. Josh, Tim, and myself will be here to answer anything that you have any questions on, whether it's on Quil's side, Crelate's side, or how they work together. We're here to help you make sure that you're successful at your desk and running your organization. So Josh, will you kick us off?
100%. Thank you very much for the intro. And just kind of echoing what was mentioned there. My name's Josh Kirkham, one of the founding head of sales over here at Quil. I'm super excited for today's webinar here. And again, the main goal of what we're going to be chatting about today is how we can actually continue to master recruiting today, really looking at how we harness the power of AI using Crelate and Quil here together. Now, the big thing that I'm hearing, especially when I'm speaking with a lot of business owners, and Tim, I'm sure it's the same on your side of things here too. Every time that I'm having new conversations with these business owners, we're always looking at a big thing here, which is how can we increase our earnings? And especially now, as we're seeing the advent of AI starting to come into the play, how can we start to use AI to start increasing the earnings of our business overall? And when I'm speaking to different business owners, I always hear two different paths that they're looking to go down, whether they're trying to do things like increase their client base, doing more business development work. And that's obviously an incredibly common way that we're trying to increase the earnings of our business today. But the actual focus of today's call is going to be on something that's often overlooked, which tends to be how can we actually increase our profit margins as we're using systems like AI, especially within our recruiting firms today. So doing some industry research, getting to know a little bit more just around obviously how the recruiting process works. The biggest things that we understand as a business here at Quil is where we're actually looking to find and source these candidates has a huge impact to the profit margins we have as a business, especially as we're looking to continue to scale. So doing some industry research, one of the most interesting things that I came across is when we're actually looking at different organizations and sites and studies out there trying to find where are we actually finding our highest quality candidates from. Probably to nobody's surprise on the webinar today, the first place tends to be through LinkedIn. whether that's LinkedIn Recruiter, LinkedIn Proper, whatever that might be. But as we can see, taking up about 41 and a bit percent of that market share, LinkedIn tends to be the place we're finding our highest quality of leads. Coming in second place here, we have things like referrals, whether that's just in-network referrals, maybe that's going to things like splits marketplaces. And then depending on the article you're looking at, 3 and 4 tend to be pretty interchangeable, whether that's going through internet job posting boards or our internal database. Now, spoiler alert for today's webinar, my main focus as a co-founder here at Quil is to flip this dashboard. Our goal is to try to make your internal database the #1 place that you are finding your highest quality of candidates. Mainly because inside of our research, the other big thing that we're noticing is that 70% of the placements we are making are actually coming from candidates sourced outside of our firm's database, right? So going to LinkedIn, going to job postings, just like we saw in that other article. But interestingly enough, 66% of those externally sourced and placed candidates already lived inside of our firm's database, but had to get manually sourced again. So if we actually start peeling back the layer of that onion there and start to break that down a little bit further, that math is telling us that 42.5% of the placements we are making, we are actually duplicating our efforts on, not only from our recruiters' time, going through LinkedIn, finding these candidates, building an outreach strategy, but also inside of our cost structures as we're looking to scale, using things like obviously LinkedIn credits, which we all know are not incredibly expensive, sourcing credits, whether that's through Sourcewell, Zoom Info, and actually building that outreach strategy here today. But most interestingly enough, in that same article, we're also seeing that candidates that recruiters have spoken with in the past are 25% more likely to respond in the future. So not only is this creating inefficiencies as we're looking to scale, because our team is having to duplicate their efforts on 42.5% of our placements here to actually start to reach out to these candidates themselves. We are duplicating our cost structures on these, but we're also starting our research from scratch. And Tim, I know this is one of the big things that you and I were chatting about on Monday. Do you mind giving the team just a little bit of insight to what you were actually mentioning just from that conversation on Monday and some of these trends that you're noticing today, even just talking with clients on your side of things?
Definitely. I mean, think of how embarrassing it is to reach out to a candidate 2 years that you talked to 2 years ago, and you don't even remember reaching out to them, right? The thing that your clients love most about all of the recruiting firms is kind of the lifeblood of your company, your database, right? The thing that you guys bring. I think it's the goal of everybody, every mature recruiting firm, to make their database the single source of truth, the thing that LinkedIn can't ever get into, right? The thing, the magic sauce that you guys offer your clients, right? So to see some of those metrics were super interesting to me, and in line with sort of everything that I hear from our clients on a daily basis. You know, how can we replicate LinkedIn, right? When you guys have relationships that you spent years cultivating, that are gold in your database. And I think the future of sourcing is really going to come from what insights our database can provide for us when we're starting a search. Instead of going outside of your database and starting to look on LinkedIn, starting to look internally and getting the relationships that LinkedIn can't offer your clients. So again, I think your database being your source of truth and kind of the magic that you provide for your clients is the goal of every mature recruiting firm. And I think that comes from that database being helpful in identifying people that you should be talking to.
Yeah. And I think that one of the biggest things I even hear, Tim, just to echo a lot of those statements you made too, a lot of the executives at these firms that I'm speaking with, just from a culture perspective inside of the firms, we always know that those final candidates that we're actually looking to place generally have phenomenal ATS hygiene, right? They have everything up to date, everything's ready, because we're actually looking to present those to our clients at the end of the day. Now, the biggest gap where I'm really hearing this come up the most tend to be from the 12 to 16 candidates that we sourced before and had initial screening calls with, but for one reason or another just weren't phenomenal fits for that exact role we were looking to place today, right? So short-term thinking there. But just because they weren't a great fit for the role we were looking to fill in Ohio, just like most of the team might be in, doesn't mean they're not a great fit for a role we're looking to fill in 3, 6 months, or even 2 years down the line, exactly what you mentioned there as well, Tim. And so this is exactly where Quil can come in for a lot of the clients we're working with, because The cool thing with Quil is we're an AI note-taking tool built specifically for recruiting firms. So we don't do this for anyone else except for our friends here in the third-party recruiting space. And what it is that we're actually doing is Quil helps automatically take notes on you on these calls, depending on whatever type of call you might be looking to do. Maybe things like interviews, intake calls, reference calls, or even business development work. We'll automatically update Crelate forward, and we even have an example today that we'll go through. And the best part is we'll even automatically help create the first draft of one of your write-ups. And I'll go through a couple examples of what that can look like today. But maybe things like submittals or scorecards we might be sending out after an interview, to even things like job descriptions that we might be creating after something like an intake call. But from the clients we're working with today, our average firm finds that they're able to save 8 hours per recruiter per week by using Quil to help automate their admin work. So whether they're doing phone calls, video calls, or even in-person meetings, Quil can be there to make sure all your notes are taken accurately. All you'd have to do is hang up the phone and end your video call. But before we actually go into showing Quil, let's actually do a live example so everyone on the webinar today can actually see what Quil looks like live in action. So we'll go through some test examples, but I'll even make a live example so we can see what this looks like. So what I did before the call started today, I just pulled up a list on my side. I found this candidate, Ryan Frampton. I think could be a phenomenal fit for a role that we're looking to fill. Again, one of the beautiful things with Quil is you can actually make phone calls even directly from a Crelate contact record directly here. So what I'm going to do is actually click on my Quil Chrome extension up here. This powers Quil's soft phone, and I'm actually going to give my candidate Ryan a quick phone call right now. So let me start this phone call, and I'm going to move my mic a little bit closer just so everyone could even hear on the call. Hey, is this Ryan? Hey, Ryan, it's Josh Kirkman calling from Josh's Recruiters. I know we chatted really briefly. You still good for a quick screening call right now? Awesome. Well, Ryan, it's super exciting to get to chat with you. I know the whole goal of today's call is that we're really just looking to get a better understanding of you, what you're looking for, and maybe even seeing if there's any roles that we have on our side that could be a great fit for you. Before we dive in, maybe give me a quick rundown of your last 1 or 2 roles here and some of those notable accomplishments you had over that time frame.
There are many notable accomplishments.
Josh, we don't hear anything if there's anything on the other end.
Oh, it's not coming through on that side of things? Well, that's too bad. Oh, I would do it live. I'll show the mock thing after in a second here. Well, I would just keep going here. I know you're mentioning some of the accomplishments that you had mentioned, and obviously some of the next roles you're looking for. Maybe just give us a quick rundown of your compensation expectations, and we'll wrap up that mock call so the rest of the webinar can keep hearing it. Oh, well, I appreciate you taking the time today, Ryan. I'll go and find some roles on my side of things, and then we can see if things can make sense in the future. But I'll send you some great offers here in the next couple of days here. Here, I'll hang up the call really quick. But before I do, thanks for letting me know that wasn't coming through perfectly. But I'll still make sure to show that example in a second here. The cool thing with Quil, as we're seeing, is even from the phone call, you can easily set the type of call that you want this to be on, which automatically dictates the notes that Quil's going to automatically take for you. So in that mock example, I'll show everyone what this looks like in a second here. But obviously from an interview call, here are some key things that Quil might look to track, or maybe even a script or talking points that I want to make sure my team can follow. And again, this is fully configurable depending on whatever type of call you're looking to run. So for example, something like a reference call will obviously have totally different categories or even a different script that you'd want to see. That's, again, fully customizable back to your team's process. When I'm done, all I'm going to do is hang up the call here. It'll take about 2 to 3 minutes for Quil to process those notes. But what we'll actually see once that call is done, and this is just another example here, but you'll get a full transcript of that conversation. So we can easily see the full back and forth going on with the candidate or the client there themselves. We also give you a recording of the call. So if you ever wanted to listen back to the game tape, maybe reconfirm some of the information that candidate mentioned, or even for my favorite use case for this is we're looking to build and scale out Quil. I actually use this for coaching opportunities, especially as I'm looking to bring on some newer account executives on the team. But again, the really unique thing that Quil can actually do is we can actually take examples of like the questions that you're asking on calls, or even examples of what your write-ups might actually typically look like. And we can upload those into Quil so it automatically fills in that context for you. So as an example, if we were doing something like an interview or a screening call, some common things that teams generally want Quil to take notes on might be around like the previous companies a candidate worked for, what their day-to-day responsibilities there were. Maybe even looking at things like what notable accomplishments did they have within each different position they've held throughout their career, the reason for leaving some of these roles in the past, to even something as cool as what could their ideal next role actually look like, or even their compensation expectations. And it's helping you easily track and organize all of this content. The coolest part about this as well, you don't need to ask these questions in a certain order, and you don't need to make sure your team is saying like a specific keyword for Quil to pick it up, because frankly, that would just suck, right? The whole goal of using a tool like this is you can just sit back and let your team do what you do best. And when you're done, all your notes are taken, Crelate's updated, even the first draft of your write-up can be automatically made. And so the way that we actually do this at Quil is as part of onboarding, we'll have our clients send us over those examples of like the templates they're usually filling out, or the questions they're covering. And again, those examples of the write-ups they're making, our team will configure all of that into the back end of Quil so it can automatically fill in that context. But just to show an example really quickly, obviously here we were looking at something like an interview or a screening call, going through these series of questions. So the way that Quil tracks everything accurately for us is on the back end of Quil, we'll have all the different categories of the notes you want us to track. So typically those talking points or those key themes that you're looking to track on an initial call you're looking to run. And the way that we make sure that everything is tracked accurately for you is for each of those categories you might want us to track. So maybe something like the previous companies that candidate worked for, we'll just use an individualized prompt. So the AI knows that the only thing that we're going to track in this companies they worked for section is going to be what information was provided on each company that participant worked for, versus something like their compensation expectations. Just to show something else here, we'll obviously only then track their compensation expectations. In situations where we might be working with a hiring team and they give you 3 to 5 additional questions, they want you to screen that candidate before we're looking to send it off to that hiring team. You can even easily add categories to this, so we can start to customize it for maybe the specific role you're looking to fill, or if the hiring team has any of those preferences, to even doing things like changing the order of how you want these notes formatted when they're pushed back into Crelate. But the advantage here being, it doesn't matter if you're asking these questions at the start of your call, the end, or if each member of your team's asking them in a different order. Quil can make sure that all your notes are tracked and organized accurately. Now, before we keep going, were there any relevant questions or anything that we're noticing in the chat?
There were a lot.
I love that.
Yeah, we lit up. Good question. Before,
go ahead, Tim.
Before we field them, there's actually one of the things that I liked most. If you pop back over to kind of that call, Crelate users are report powerhouses, right? Yep. Not everything is a note. There's calls that you take with clients. There's calls that you take with candidates. There's interviews that you set up. One of the coolest things that I thought here when I first saw this was your ability to track this stuff and organize them in the type of meeting that you're actually having. Mm-hmm. Like Quil, for example, knows the difference between what we ask on an interview versus a screen versus an intake call. And there's different logic behind each one of those, right? So when the magic happens here and one of these goes to the CRM, all my KPI reports are updated automatically. All of the insights that Crelate gives you on the other end are automatically there. I thought that was one of the more unique things about the integration that I wanted to kind of chime in with.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll definitely do a deep dive on that side of things too. And even what Tim's mentioning here, just to show a quick sneak peek too, not only can you track based on the type of meeting, but you could even set the appropriate activity type based on that type of call, which obviously lets you use that powerhouse system in Crelate's reporting on the back end of things too. So we not only have the type of meeting you're looking to run, but even mapping it back to that specific activity type for you as well.
Cool. Let's so we have quite a few questions. And some of them have to do with us not being able to hear on the other end of that. So does Quil do any sort of call recording notifications when someone answers?
Correct. So we don't have a call recording notification yet today. One of the things that we heard from some of our early customers, especially on phone calls, is if the call started with "this call is being recorded" in that robot voice, a lot of teams would find that incredibly intrusive. And so our early customers actually asked us to disable that feature. Now, that's one of the things that we're looking to scope out today that's on our roadmap to see maybe is there something we can do with like a 5 to 10 second delay before that announcement comes up. But what we usually recommend for our clients to say is just something at the start of the call like, "Hey, Tim, do you mind if my note taker joins our call today? Love to be able to give you my full attention without missing anything in the back end." Just so we can actually get that consent at the start of the call, because depending on the state or country you're living in, it might be one party versus two party consent. I know here in Canada, at least in Ontario where I live, it's one party consent on that side of things. Great question.
Yeah, definitely a good question. How about now? I think everyone saw you make that call through Quil.
Yeah.
Does it work? Talk a little bit about what you guys do as an actual VoIP provider, or how you're able to plug in other tools that you might already use.
Yeah, so there's a couple of really cool ways that we can do this, and I'll give it a little deep dive here, and I'll showcase some of the other elements later. But the really cool thing with Quil is that we actually have a forwarding caller ID system. So what we can do is not only set up something like your cell phone number inside of Quil, so whenever you're actually making an outbound call with our platform, we can always make it look like it's coming from your cell phone number, but we could even do the same thing with things like your VoIP provider. That way, whenever you're making those outbound calls, even directly from Crelate, again, just using Quil's Chrome extension like I made that call today, it can always look like it's coming from that registered phone number that you want to have selected on the back end of things too. And you can even call directly from your cell phone if need be. We're even coming out with a mobile app early 2025, which is incredibly exciting.
That is exciting. So what you're saying is not too long they could use Quil as their VoIP as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
The full VoIP should be released March timelines, but even then we do have the functionality where we can just integrate in like your cell phone number, another VoIP provider you're using today, just as that forwarding caller ID system inside of Quil.
Excellent. So we have a couple questions about the types of questions you were asking. Can you talk a little bit about how those questions are generated? Are they able to change those questions? Are they able to make their own?
Yeah, 100%. So we actually highly recommend that you have your own questions and bring them in. This was just a template that I provided within Quil. So on the back end of things, we have all the different meeting types you can select. There's a couple default ones that we give to every single one of our customers just to make things easy, like an interview, reference call, job order intake, or a business development call. But one of the things that we highly recommend through onboarding is you actually send us over the list of questions that you typically ask, depending on the type of call that you're looking to run. Or again, those examples of what your write-ups look like, which I'll showcase in a second here as well. That way we can actually customize the notes that you're looking to take exactly to your process, not just a generic one that Quil might try to make up in the back end, because that obviously wouldn't help your specific firm there too. So it's fully customizable. And our team not only helps make all these in the back end at the start for you, but in our second onboarding call with our prompt engineers, they'll actually help teach you how you can replicate these results as well as part of that onboarding process.
And let me take that one a layer deeper, because I know our customers are going to want to know. They're obviously not asking, a clerical admin the same thing as they're asking a VP of sales.
100%.
How am I able to kind of configure this to ask different questions, maybe not only by the type of call, maybe, but by the type of by the subject matter, by the type of role I might be calling a candidate for?
So the one thing that we also understand is that even though certain roles are going to have different key questions you might want to ask, there might be an 80% overlay depending on the type of call you're actually looking to run. So the cool thing that we can do in Quil is actually make a template with you. And once you have that initial template covering like the previous work experience, maybe their ideal next role, compensation, willingness to relocate, some of those key core questions, you also have the ability where you can easily clone any of these templates that we provide inside of Quil. So you can start to customize them for specific roles you're looking to fill, like a CFO role, engineering role, maybe it's a designer, whatever that might be. And that way you not only have that initial template, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you're looking to fill a new role. We can use the 70 to 80% of the questions that are going to have that overlap. And once you've made that copy, you can just go in and edit that specific meeting type, add those categories in so we can start to customize the questions and the prompts depending on that specific role or the hiring manager's preferences there too.
Excellent. So you can, in theory, have different templates based off of a number of different jobs and different types of clients that you might be be calling into. I'll answer one more, and then some of these have to do with like how that data is going to show up in Crelate and that sort of thing. Let me see. There was a really good one. Oh, tell me, and I meant to ask you this the other day when we talked. Is it VoIP providers only, or will it join your Zoom or Teams video conference?
It'll join Zoom calls, video calls, whatever that is, Zoom, Teams, Google Meets. The beautiful part is, though, instead of that bot maybe looking something like Quil, because everyone would just ask you then, what the heck's Quil? Why is it taking notes on my call? The really cool thing that we can do, especially when we're joining any of those video calls, so again, Zoom, Teams, or Google Meets, is we can actually fully brand and white label that bot for you. So here's an example of this beautiful note taker I made here for this webinar today. We can actually fully customize that back with your team's logo. So it's always your personalized note taker in any single one of those video calls as well.
Excellent.
Great questions.
All right. Yeah. Let's move on. If we can just talk a little bit about how the integration works, that sort of thing. How's this data get into Crelate? And then we can talk about 100%. Some things we can do with it.
I got one last thing to show, and then we'll go into Crelate, because I know the one thing is updating Crelate is probably what, a 5, maybe 10-minute process once that call is done. It's definitely incredibly vital, but we know the thing that can be more time consuming is actually putting together something like a submittal or a scorecard after something like an interview. So there's 2 different ways that we could help with this. One option actually is we can use prompts like this, where wherever you see the brackets popping up on the screen are just different personalized elements that Quil can start to automatically fill in based on the context of the call you're having. But the second option, which is what I find most of our clients are doing today, is they'll again send us over a couple of examples of what good actually looked like. So in this example of after our interview for something like a submittal they're looking to send, we can actually use a prompt like this. And just to paraphrase what it's saying is, we're going to use Tim's write-up of what it typically looks like here. But we're going to then make sure that we're using Tim's writing style, his tonality, the structure and format that he typically puts in, but obviously add that new context in. So when you're done your call, not only does Quil have all the notes that we've taken automatically for you, but in your follow-up material section, you could even have something like the first draft of that submittal automatically made. And so in the example we're looking at here today, just based on that template we showcase, we can obviously see my participant's name, how long they've been in their career, work experience summarized in point form notes, to even things like the reason for Ryan's search, and even his compensation expectations easily listed out. So all we would need to do from here, just add your finishing touches to it. Make sure it's in your writing style. It's obviously relevant to that role you're looking to fill. But from the teams that we're working with today, they're finding that this is helping them accelerate their time to create those deliverables by 80 to 90%. Where once you put your finishing touches on it, you can easily copy that text if you want to send it off in an email, or even easily download as a text file or a PDF if we want to attach a resume to it before we're looking to send it off as a profile. And it's not just things like interview calls. We can fully customize this for business development calls, getting any key details that you want to see based on those hiring notes, even things like intake calls, where we might be looking to understand position details, maybe even understanding what good looks like in the first 30, 60, 90 days, and even incorporating that to make things like a job description maybe after that call is finished. Same idea, giving us examples of how you're typically doing this today, so we get you 90% of the way done what that typical write might look like. But to your point as well, Tim, how does this actually get back into Crelate to make sure we have all that valuable data for us? And so the way that this works is if we're doing a video call with somebody, Zoom, Teams, Google Meets, Quil this integrates back into your calendar so we can actually see the invite details from there. So if that candidate's email address lives back inside of Crelate, Quil will be able to see that to know who to automatically update. If you're doing a phone call, even similar to how I was calling Ryan earlier today, which unfortunately I know nobody was able to hear, we can easily map that back based on their phone number. And so the really cool part of this integration is we'll automatically push all those notes directly back into your categories here, and even being able to map it back to the specific activity types that you'd like to track, which is going to use that powerhouse system from the reporting side of things, which is obviously a key thing that Tim's going to chat about here in a sec. But the biggest advantage being that it doesn't matter if Tim takes notes differently than Jordan, who has a different note-taking style than Sarah, because obviously then as we're looking to do things like Boolean searches or candidate match back inside of Crelate, it makes it tough to find any of that information because we've all put it in there differently. So now with Quil, we not only standardize how your notes end up back inside of Crelate, even at mapping it back to your specific activity type, but we can even update any of the fields that you'd want us to track inside of that candidate's profile as well. So that could be things like their current job position, the company they work for, their compensation expectations, maybe even things like the reason for search. And all you'd have to do is hang up the phone or end that video call. Now, Tim, I know this is one of the things when you and I were chatting the other day that you thought was awesome. Maybe give a little more insight to the rest of the team. And I'll give you some of the screen sharing functionalities now here too, of what we can actually do now that we have all that valuable detail back inside of Crelate.
Yeah. So, I mean, and a lot of the Crelate users out there are going to know how valuable it is just to get this kind of content in the database because they're used to the way that our search works, the way that our reporting works. But it kind of takes me back to, show that screen, kind of takes me back to what I'm able to then report on, right? When, and I don't have Quil hooked up in this environment. It's going to look familiar to a lot of people out there. But it comes back to the fact that when Quil takes a note, and coming from, again, my screen calls and my interviews and my client intake calls and all of the different things we organize as far as types of conversations that we're having, the content automatically being pushed directly back to the CRM, becomes searchable. So one of the things that was mentioned there a second ago was the ability to map to fields. Well, Crelate users are going to recognize that from the questions that they already ask in Crelate on the activity form. So if I'm on the phone with Sophia today and she says, hey, I want to make XYZ or relocate to a certain spot, that's automatically going to be field level data that's searchable inside of the database. So the fact that it takes it a step further outside of just a generic note that I can type through any text and search through, right? And it actually puts it in a structured data, searchable and reportable format is going to be immediately available, right? And again, what's the difference between an interview and a screen call? What's the difference between a screen call and a BD call, right? So we need to be able to search through those and report on those things separately. So searching is the first area where I think that as far as, and a lot of AI note takers out there, integrated or not, right, push things through. Like we as a company use one and it pushes everything through just as a generic conversational note, for lack of a better, here's some things that happened, here's a summary of that. But to know that that note was in the specific context of a type of conversation without me having to press any buttons to achieve that, I think is going to be immediately valuable. And then, I mean, everybody's seen the KPI reporting and things like that. I need to know how many recruiting calls I've made versus X, Y versus Y versus Z. Again, I don't have to spend half my time going back to the CRM and labeling things as the right type of conversation. Quil's kind of done that in the integration. So the reporting capabilities around that, I think, are the other strong point. So I get organized notes that come through that are contextual based on the conversation. I don't have to change the type of event so that I get good reports, or Courtney gets good reports so she can look at them. And I can search through these things specifically. When I asked this candidate last week about this job, where they wanted to relocate to, what was the answer? And you're going down to we had a screen with this candidate about this job. So it's the way that you guys are familiar searching just in general.
There's a lot of questions, guys. Can I stop you? You sounded like you both took a breath. So can I jump in?
Please.
All right. So Ralph asked the question, I found that AI will answer questions in scripts that I did not ask, often misinformation. How do I avoid that?
Yeah, so there's going to be a system, especially depending on AI, around hallucination. It's going to be a very common term that people hear. There's a bunch of factors that lead into what leads to hallucinations, right? So there's things called a temperature, which can be dependent on the model you're looking to use. One of the big things that we believe as a product is we actually specifically chose the LLM that we use because it has what's called a low temperature, which means it is less prone to hallucinating. The second thing that drastically helps minimize hallucinations is when we can actually provide examples to Quil. Now, that could be things like examples of what a write-up might typically look like, one that you've actually submitted to a client. So we actually have something to map it back to, and even having more specific prompts that we can actually use in the back end of things. So an example being, if you tell AI that you would like it to give a salary expectation for Tim, AI is going to find a reason to find a salary expectation for Tim, even if it wasn't mentioned on the call. And so one of the cool things that we actually do with our prompts a lot of times, we say, please say what the candidate's compensation expectations were, but if nothing was mentioned, please leave blank. The big thing that we have to keep in mind is we're using AIs. It is the most literal thing that you will ever see in your life. So if you ask it to do something, it is going to find a way to do it. So we need to make sure that we also tell it, if it wasn't mentioned, make sure you don't say anything. And so that's some of the big things that we look to accomplish here at Quil, to make sure that we're minimizing hallucinations, especially when it comes to things like the notes or the fields that we're looking to update in the back end.
Thanks.
Great question.
You mentioned prompts, but I think this question revolves around prompts. Can I use some of the scripts or prompts that Quil has already set up? Like you mentioned that they already come templated. So
100%. All the examples that I was showing today are just from our templated ones in the back end. And I use them all the time for interviews that I'm running as I'm scaling out the team. We use them for our sales calls, similar to business development calls as well. So if you don't have a very strict process or a series of questions that you're looking to run, that's exactly why we created those templates in the back end, just to make things nice and simple for you.
You mentioned about individual users, different jobs, different, opportunities. Can each user have their own templates that they can customize per call, or are they shared throughout the organization? And are there limits of the amount of templates?
Great question. So we do have it shared because we do understand that Courtney might be looking to fill a VP of sales role this month, but Tim might be looking to do that next quarter. And so we want to make sure that there is consistency, especially when we see Courtney's doing a great job with her placements. How do we replicate that across the team to create that predictability? So we like to make sure we do have that shared resource so we can actually tap into systems that are being used really well. Each individual user, though, has the ability where they can actually customize those meeting types in the backend and make it incredibly easy to find the road. So we can make a VP of sales search for Courtney and a VP of sales search for Tim, and they can both access that differently. That third question around the limit there are to the number of meeting types, the limit does not exist. If anyone's a big fan of a Mean Girls there. So the limit does not exist. You can have as many as you'd like, and you can even archive ones that you aren't currently using just to make sure that everything stays organized in the back end of Quil.
There's two more, and then I promise I'll stop unless people keep asking questions.
Oh, keep going out, and then I'll show that example of the call that we made that unfortunately no one was able to hear, but I'll show what the meeting notes look like still.
That would be amazing. Can you talk about security protocols, making sure this doesn't train the model and keeping our information secure within our company?
That's such a great question. And honestly, this is probably one of the biggest factors that we take so incredibly seriously here at Quil. Just a little fun fact. Our CTO, the person who's building this, I like to call him the wizard because he's phenomenal. He actually used to build banking apps here in Canada before he came over to Quil, and even worked in the crypto space. And if anyone knows anything about Canadian banks, we have some of the most highly regulated banking systems in the entire world. And so making sure that data, security, and privacy are top of mind are some of the biggest factors for us. So what we've already built into Quil is all of the accounts are actually fully encrypted at rest and in transit, which means that nobody has access to see any of the information that's going on inside of your account except for your specific team. We don't use it to train any of the models because we know if we're actually pushing that back to the models, if somebody is good with prompt engineering, they'll be able to reverse engineer it and find sensitive information. So we make sure everything's encrypted on that specific account, because the other thing that we know is these massive LLMs out there, whether that's Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever that is, they're spending billions, like with a B, of dollars per year updating and investing those models. There's no way any of our companies can actually put the efforts in to update the models faster than they can. And we just get all the benefits when they improve those models themselves. So we take those models, have a bit of a spin specifically for recruiters, but making sure that everything is closed off and encrypted, just so we're making sure that data security and privacy are top of mind.
As you're going to go back into the system and show us that call, Brooke had another question. If you're joining a client Zoom call, for example, how does Quil match the contact and company record in Crelate if it doesn't know who it's attached to? Like, how do they integrate the notes into the record when it's not just an individual calling using the Quil soft phone?
Yeah, and so that's one of the really cool systems we have. Anytime that Quil is joining a call, whether you're the meeting host or somebody else is, if that contact lives inside a Crelate, either based on their email address or their phone number, depending on that channel you're using to initiate that call, Quil will be able to map it back to that specific candidate. If for whatever reason that candidate or client does not live inside of Crelate yet, I know it's common sometimes that we might do a sourcing call Courtney before we look to add her into Crelate. You can even easily go back into Quil, map it back to that candidate after you've created inside of Crelate after. So whether they already live in there, we'll be able to find it automatically to map it back in. Or after that call is finished, you're like, yep, Courtney's a fantastic candidate. Let me make Courtney's contact record inside of Crelate. What you can actually do, and this actually ties directly into this next piece, because I'll be able to show that here. Share my screen really quickly. Is when you go to that finished call, you can actually map it back to the specific record name. And so if that contact didn't already live inside of Crelate, you would just search them up based on their phone number or email after you've added into Crelate there. So Quil can know to automatically update that record. Great question.
And to kind of piggyback on that, what's the mechanism for inviting Quil to a meeting that you don't own? So if you, I think Brooke's particular question was, hey, I'm on a client's Zoom. Like how does Quil join that meeting so that it can even get a log of the conversation that's happening?
Yeah, so inside of Quil, as part of the preferences as we're actually setting it up, you have the option where you can either set Quil to automatically join external calls. So this would be based on them having a different email domain than you, or auto joining internal calls. So right now I have it set that Quil will automatically join any external calls for me. So any calls that I have on my calendar that might have a video link in it, sort of like this GTM advisory call I have coming up, Quil can know to automatically join that call for me. If for whatever reason I didn't want Quil to join that call, you can easily just toggle that off, and then my auto join will actually disappear, just like you're seeing here. So now Quil knows not to automatically join that call, but we just have those preference settings that you can then start to select, or even just choose specific calls you might want Quil to join if it is more of a manual section. So in that same example, say this is a client call I wanted Quil to join, I can just click this join option. Because there's a video link that already lives inside of that invite, all I would have to then do is click connect bot. It'll take about 10 seconds for Quil to join that call, and then we'll be in there making sure that all your notes are taken accurately. Great question. And just to highlight this really quickly, I'm sorry that nobody was able to hear this call, but I actually gave my co-founder Ryan a quick call on that webinar, just going through a quick little mock example. So what we can see here is actually the previous companies that Ryan said he worked for, what his day-to-day responsibilities there were. These were obviously some of those things that took a little bit longer, like you mentioned, Tim, a lot of experience that they were mentioning on the call. Ryan did not explicitly state his reason for leaving inside of some of these roles, but we can see Ryan's ideal next role is an incubator director, and he's actually looking for a compensation expectation of $150,000, which is actually down from $350,000 because he's looking for more work-life balance. What we can even see there is when this call is done in our follow-up materials, Quil can even have the first draft of that write-up automatically made for me. And this is even made from a 60-second phone call here, where I have all the information, why Ryan's actually looking for a new role, even his compensation expectations. So if I just put my finishing touches on it, I can make sure everything is ready for me to go, and obviously drastically saving my time as I'm looking through that process too. Now, obviously, it'd be a lot cooler if everyone could hear the call as well, so they get the phone.
I love it.
Any last questions or things in the chat? There, we have 2 minutes left in the scheduled call, the scheduled webinar here. No questions or bad questions. Tim or myself are happy to answer. We can even toss it over to Courtney if we want something fun. Courtney says no, but we'll do it anyway.
No, you two are the ones to talk about this. I think you guys talked about this, but maybe you can elaborate on it. There's a sub question from Brooke. Can you map a meeting note to a company record or a job record? And I know you guys were showing the types of calls that you were doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so in the current setup inside of Quil, we just have it mapped back to like a contact or candidate record today. It is one of the things that we're looking to build out further to be able to map it back to other objects we might be looking to take, for example, like a job record on the back end. That is definitely something that we have coming down on our roadmap to make sure, especially for things like business development calls, we might want to map that back to a company record instead of a contact record, because the company is a team that we're actually looking to do that business with. Great question.
And kind of part two for that, a lot of the calls you're going to have are going to automatically regard the jobs that you're talking to them about. So that is still going to be a roll up to the job. And as you guys know, in Crelate, anything that rolls up to the job also rolls up to the company. So we do some spidering there. As long as we're regarding the type of call to the job.
We love solutions engineers. They help. We'll go through all of those little spidering in those webs. We love it, Tim.
I love it. What else? Where do you see AI and recruitment heading over the next 5 years, and how is Quil prepared for those changes? Where's your crystal ball at, Josh?
That's such a phenomenal question. Honestly, over 5 years from now, who knows, right? Like there's so much that's going to be evolving inside of AI, especially as these LLM models continue to develop. I think the big bias that we have as a business is that the role of AI is never to replace what a recruiter is doing. It's just that extra tool in their tool belt to help them find that extra 30% efficiency. And so the big bias that we see is that recruiters obviously have a role because they're phenomenal at what they do. They're great at finding candidates, qualifying that candidate, and getting the right ones over to them. The big role of where we see AI really being implemented is helping with all that back-end work, right? That we can see that there's front-end AI system, there's back-end AI systems. And obviously one of the easiest ways to reduce bias is not letting AI make decisions for us. It helps give us the information in clear and easy to use format so that we, the people who know best, can actually make those decisions. And that's a really big bias that we believe as a business. Our goal is to take all the crappy work that nobody likes to do, updating systems, creating write-ups, doing some of that back-end work, and giving you more time to actually do revenue generating activities and getting in front of clients and candidates. And so especially as we're seeing AI develop over the next couple of years, the big thing that we're really looking to help accomplish is how can we use this so that you can either keep your cost structures flat but see an increase in your productivity, or as you're looking to double down on some of the costs that you're looking to put in, maybe that's extra recruiters on your team, things like that, how can you actually see an accelerated hockey stick from those earnings that you're looking to produce? And that's a really big focus that we have as a business.
Last question, and then I promise to let you go, but people are loving this.
We love it.
I guess it's a two-parter. I'm going to combine two questions into one. Number one, if people want to find out the cost of Quil, where do we go? And the other part is if they want to stay abreast of this whole soft phone, the launch in March that you guys are having, if they need to figure that out, where do they stay ahead of that information as well? So that it's more information. How do we give it to them?
100%. So if anyone's interested in learning a bit more about Quil or even seeing some of the cost structures that we do have, you can easily schedule some time with our team. The pricing is listed on the website as well for like a single user, but we do offer economies of scale depending on the number of licenses that we're looking at too. So what I might recommend is either just go to quil.ai, just our website. You can easily schedule a demo there. On that first call, our team is more than happy to go through a more in-depth demo of anything you'd like to see. And we could even go through specific pricing options directly on that first call with you. We don't make you wait for a second or third call to do so. If anyone's interested in learning a bit more about Quil, just keeping up to date, we can always have you subscribe to our newsletter as well, just so you can see all those new crazy things that we got coming up, or even follow us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably one of the biggest areas that we look to post updates about what's actually going on at Quil.
I love it. Thank you so much, Josh and Tim, for both of your expertise. This was amazing. Anybody that needs to reference this will be available on recording as well on our social platforms. Be sure to reach out with any additional questions, and we're going to give you your time back. Thank you for sticking with us for an extra 3 minutes, and have a wonderful day, guys.
Talk soon, everyone.
Thank you, guys.